Hello, good morning, Dr. Long. Hope all is well. This is my final presentation. I will be talking about kinesics and trauma-informed victim approach. Kinesics is the study of body gestures, body movement, and it is also a form of nonverbal communication. It was founded by anthropologist Ray Birdwhitzel, and it was first used in 1952. Ray Birdwhitzel believed that communication was systematic, whether it had been nonverbal or verbal, and he wanted to study how people responded in social environments. In the 1960s and the 1970s to early 1980s, his studies became popularized by publications on how to read a person like a book. What? Okay. During his studies, it involved taking a group of people and putting them in different social environments, and he would study and videotape how they would interact with each other. He will also see how people would respond to nonverbal communication, verbal communication, because during that time, a lot of people did not understand that you could communicate in many different ways without opening your mouth. A lot of people did not know about nonverbal communication. They were not aware that a person could sometimes just tell what you're thinking by the look on your face, or they could just tell the way you feel by the way you sit up and speak, eye to eye contact. It's just a lot of different forms of nonverbal communication. And during his experiments, he tested several of them. He also argued that all body movements had meaning, and no verbal communication had grammar that could be analyzed with similar terms that related to verbal communication. The term kinmei is a group of movements with a meaning similar to phonmei, which is a specified language that distinguishes one word from another. These two terms were similar because it consisted of a group of movements that were not identical, but they could be interchangeable without causing conflict. And when I mean conflict, I mean it didn't impact the social meaning of an interaction. Kinesics can also be used as signs of deception by interviewers and interrogators of one's statement. When they use kinesics, they look for clusters of movements to determine the credibility of one's statement. It can also be applied in any context and type of setting to interpret harmless messages when a carrier is unable to verbally express themselves or sometimes even verbally speak. Excuse me, I'm sorry. One of the main issues with kinesics is when it comes down to multicultural interactions. When you have different people coming from all over the world, not everybody communicates the same. Not everybody says the same words. Not everybody says the same phrases. Not everybody responds a certain way to a certain word. Everybody's different. So, for example, you have someone who was raised as a Muslim and someone who is raised as a Christian. And as they're communicating about religion, they're sitting there and they're talking about the different gods and everything about that. So when, just take for example, if they get to debating, sometimes they don't even have to open their mouth to say that they don't agree with something or to say that they don't believe in it. A lot of the times their facial expressions and their body posture will let you know that they are no longer interested in the conversation, or they really just don't believe a word that you're saying. Kinesics was used in the case with Chris Watts. He was interviewed after his wife and daughters were reported missing. And in this interview, the interviewer studied his posture, studied the word, studied the responses to the questions, but the main thing that the interviewer studied was the licking of his lips. Studies have shown that when a person experiences dry mouth, that means 9 times out of 10 they're experiencing extreme nervousness. And not all the time that does not mean that the person is being deceitful. That sometimes can mean that the interviewee is not comfortable, or something you said made them uncomfortable and now it's making them nervous. And majority of the time this does happen in the beginning of the interview, because being an interviewer, you have to make the interviewee comfortable. You have to build rapport in order to build your case. The interviewer actually had the interviews, well, it was a video. So as the interview video was going on, his actions were studied as the time went on. Here it says, just 34 seconds into the interview, Chris Watts' mouth got dry. And the interviewer could tell that his mouth was getting dry because he kept licking his lips every 30 seconds. Here it says that when a person is experiencing nervousness and they experience dry mouth, the main way that you can tell is if a person licks their lips over several times in a time frame of 1 minute. Sometimes it's like 1 to 5 minutes, that range. So studies had shown that when a person becomes nervous, in the oldest brain, I believe it's called, the oldest brain function, I believe it's called reptile brain. And it's basically a person cannot control how they respond to something, especially when they're nervous. They can't control it. So as the interview went on, the interviewer asked him certain questions like, do you know where your daughter is? Or like, when was the last time you saw your daughter? No, it wasn't those types of questions. The interviewer had him do an exercise. So he wrote down his daughter's name. His daughter's name is Celeste. And when he wrote down his daughter's name, he closed his eyes. Studies show that when an interviewee closes their eyes during the interrogation process, that is called blocking. When blocking, you ask yourself during the interview, what does this person not want me to see? What is it that they're necessarily hiding? Is it the truth? Is it that I hit a nerve? Or is it just something that they're just not comfortable talking about? The interviewer also noted down that as he closed his eyes, he asked himself questions. What does this person not want me to see? And it could have been the truth. The whole thing could have been Chris Watts knew exactly what happened to his daughters and to his wife, but he blocked. And he also acted very nonchalantly. It was like he didn't even care that his wife and children were missing. But when the interviewer would ask questions, especially yes or no questions, the interviewer would study like his gestures, like head nods and the finger motions, and still studying the licking of his lips. The interviewer had noticed that he could not answer. His facial expressions and his nods were not matching his answers. His emotions were not matching his answers. So that raised many red flags. It raised questions like, what does he not want me to know? Does he know what really happened to his wife and his children? Was he involved? It was just so many questions that flared up because with his interview, he showed such a lack of interest, and you can even hear it in the tone of his voice that he just showed a lack of interest of what was going on with his wife and his children. If your wife and children are missing, there's no way you're gonna be so calm and nonchalant about them being missing. You don't, and then your wife's pregnant. So it's just on top of that, you really don't know. You're showing no type of concern. Kinesics, one thing I will say about kinesics is it does not always show that a person is lying. It can sometimes show that a person is uncomfortable. It can show that a person is aware, alert, listening. Kinesis can show so many things because when it comes down to body language, it says so much. Your body can say so much without even you opening your mouth. And I find that quite interesting about kinesics. And finally, here we are with trauma-informed victim approach. Now, with trauma victim approach, it is basically the study of how trauma affects a victim psychologically, physically, emotionally, all the aspects of how a person is affected by trauma. Trauma is basically when a person is emotionally scarred from something that happened traumatically. It could be abuse, the loss of a loved one, anything that could really just bring you down and really just scar you for your life. There's no specific type of trauma. Trauma can come in different shapes and forms, and a lot of people deal with trauma differently. A lot of people suffer from PTSD because they don't know how to deal with their trauma. And a lot of the times, people who have been traumatized, that they continue to be traumatized by their triggers. And when they become triggered, oh man. The foundations of trauma are centered around 6 fundamental principles, and it's called SCRIPT. The S stands for safety, which is defined by those who serve as a high priority. The C stands for collaborate, which law enforcement agencies partner up to level power, reclaim, voice and choice, take back. Issues of the I is issues of importance, including culture, gender, identity, race, religion. The S. Oh yeah, I said the S. The S is for safety. Yeah, I'm all wrong. Excuse me, I'm sorry. I'm really just trying to locate everything. Dr. Long, I'm so sorry that this presentation is trash. If we were in school, I promise you, it would be so much better. Like, I don't even know. But okay, so here's my example of trauma-informed victim approach. With the surviving of R. Kelly, when the docu-series came out, there were multiple women who came out and basically spoke about the abuse that they suffered with R. Kelly and how they're still traumatized from it till this day. Mind you, these women were sexually abused, they were mentally abused, they were brainwashed, they were manipulated from the age, probably I think the youngest was 14 or 15, to grown women. And in this docu-series, you can really see how traumatizing these women were. Not how traumatizing these women were, how traumatized these women were, excuse me. You have his 2 girlfriends, Jocelyn and Azriel. They basically defended R. Kelly. They feel as though R. Kelly, he didn't do this to us. He loves us. We're in a happy relationship. In the interview with Gayle King that they did, they basically defended R. Kelly, saying that the things that he did to those girls that the people said that he did not do. That at the end of the day, it was about a money thing. And you can really see how traumatized they really were. You could just tell by the way they would get hostile, just get upset. And it's all about why. It's just like, why get upset about something that, if it's not true, you know? And I do understand that Gayle King said some provoking things, but that doesn't take away from what actually is. R. Kelly manipulated and brainwashed and sexually abused these girls. And now they have to sit in front of a TV, not in front of a TV, in front of a camera, and basically talk about their experience and talk about how still to this day they're still traumatized and how they're never really going to be over what they experienced with R. Kelly. And in that Gayle King interview, it really just shows you how far a person can be traumatized, like how far it can go. If you're sitting up here defending your abuser, a man who took you as a young lady, basically as a child, and brainwashed you and filled your mind up with all these things, but he also took advantage of you, and you sit up here and defend him, it's traumatic because you were traumatized. You really don't know. You really don't know if he really does love you or is this abuse, because this has been happening for such a long time. You really are just oblivious to everything else that's been going on. R. Kelly brainwashed these two girls. In this polygamous relationship, he brainwashed these two girls because there's no way that these women were also sexually involved with underage girls. So it's like, you knew what R. Kelly was doing. He did it to younger girls, but he did it to you. And you're so traumatized from it, and you're so scared of this man that you're allowing him to do it to other females just to be safe. I feel like that's what it was really about. You just let R. Kelly do things to you and do things to other women, underage girls, just because you wanted to be safe. But then when you look at the interview, you think to yourself, was it really about safety? Or has he brainwashed them and scarred them so deeply that they really believe that they are not being abused and they are not being manipulated, and that R. Kelly did not take advantage of these women? And I just think overall, with kinesics and the study of body movement and also the study of how people really respond to their trauma, I find it quite interesting. Me personally, I have been through some traumatic things, and I do see how it can get a person to respond, and how when it comes down to law enforcement agencies on how they have to interview certain victims with certain cases. You have sex trafficking victims, domestic violence victims, child abuse, sham marriages, all these different forms of abuse and all these different victims. It's all a different approach. And with the 6 principles of script is how it is carried out. And that, Dr. Long, is my presentation.